I feel like the atmosphere is really electric. I mean, listen to it right now, and this is the last day of the show.
Well, it's a great chance for us to gather new business and see what's new in the industry. See you at the next IT Expo. We'll be here.
Been in voice over IP for a long time. Dialpad 1, and we ended up buying the name back from Yahoo, which is why we got the same name. But I've seen a ton of changes, and so the topic of this discussion is supposed to be around third generation cloud architecture and platform and stuff. And having this background from going from really, really early stages, because I think the first time I was at this conference was probably 2002, and it's great to see that it's still going strong and bigger than ever. But to go from that to where we are today, from like when we were talking about making international long distance calls for free to the US in 1999, like the technology was terrible. The internet was terrible. There weren't even protocols like we were using H.323. It was just not a great experience for any of our users, but at the end of the day, it saved people a ton of money, and it allowed everyone to be able to communicate. You can really see the promise of voice over IP at that time. So you take it all the way forward 17 years to today, that now the largest enterprises worldwide are all using the same technology. It's been a pretty amazing journey. So the question of why architecture matters is pretty interesting to me, because architecture is one of these things that generally you don't really think about. Like, as long as you pick up the phone, you hear a dial tone, you push the buttons and it connects, that's generally, who cares about what the architecture is behind it. But at the end of the day, what you're able to do really depends on the architecture, and there's really been some dramatic sea changes over the last 17 years and where we are today. And we're in the best spot today, obviously, because it just keeps progressing. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So going back to that earlier slide, back in those early days, like I was thinking about it, when we started Dialpad 1, this was a startup in 1999, you had to raise a ton of money just to get started back in those days. Everything was built on Sun servers running Oracle databases. Like that is an expensive way just to get started, like ridiculously expensive. Then you put it into a data center that costs, I don't know, about $125,000 a month, if I recall. You got a storage array. I remember we had 1 terabyte storage array from EMC that cost us $800,000 and cost $5,000 a month in power just to keep it turned on. Now that's on a key fob. And so if you think about it, this is what it took to just get to the starting point. And then for us to buy, there weren't a lot of competitors selling wholesale voice over IP traffic. So we were paying a penny a minute, and we were paying a lot for this stuff. Now that stuff is about 1/10 of that cost. So there's just so many changes. So then you go from Dialpad to Grand Central, which was 2006. All of a sudden, H.323 has been replaced by SIP. Much better. There's a lot more competitive offerings out there. There's CLEX, there's competition for numbers and customers, and Skype had come out by now. And all of a sudden you didn't need Oracle anymore. You could use MySQL, which was for free, and you didn't need Sun servers. You could use Dell servers, which were commodity products. All of a sudden your cost of investment was a lot lower, and there was a lot more you could do. So our Grand Central product, we decided, look, instead of just using voice over IP to make things cheaper, how can we use voice over IP to make things better? Like, how do we move all the features to the cloud and put you, the user, in charge of it? And so that's what became Google Voice. I stayed at Google for 3 years. We really launched it out to tens of millions of people. And then in about 2010, left to go do this new company, and luckily Yahoo was nice enough to sell us back the name Dialpad. But our 2 products that we launched were, one was Uber Conference, which is how do you make conference calling better, and the other one was Dialpad, which is a unified communication. And at the end of the day, what we really saw as a need is not on the consumer side anymore, because consumers have figured it out. You pick the device you want, either an iPhone or an Android, use the apps you want, you communicate, use a text messaging, whatever video service, whatever you want, you use, and you use it well, and you're pretty happy. And then you show up to work, and work is literally like getting in a time machine, right? It's like, all of a sudden there's a phone sitting on a desk for the way my dad used to work, right? We'd sit next to maybe even a typewriter, for God's sakes, but it's not the way you'd expect to go to work today. So like, at the end of the day, we saw the opportunity of how do we take business communications and make it great. How do we make it different? So we'll talk a little bit about that and how the architecture plays into that. Because now it's WebRTC. Now it can run in the browser. Now you get so much of this stuff for free. Thank God Google open sourced the WebRTC project. But there's so much you can do, and there's all the building blocks to be able to do screen sharing, voice, video, messaging. It's all in there, and it's effectively literally free. So, okay, so the question is, let me ask you a question. Like, what do you think your business will look like in 10 years? Or do you know what your business will look like in 10 years? And if you think the answer is yes, you're probably lying. I mean, 10 years is a ridiculous amount of change, and it is the unknown. Like 10 years ago, so many businesses didn't even exist. Tesla, Elon put the car in space, didn't exist 10 years ago. Airbnb didn't exist 10 years ago. So many things have changed over the last 10 years that Ray Kratzwell said, over this 100 years of the 21st century, there'll be about 20,000 years worth of change or technological progress. That's enough time for 5 more via Chapter 11 filings. Boom, boom. So anyway, so if there's some Cisco guys in the crowd, John Chambers even said, 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies won't exist in 10 years. I mean, that's a pretty scary thought, but it's probably true. It's probably true. So this isn't just an esoteric exercise. So some of the ones we think about, Stripe, changing the way companies do payment processing and credit card transactions. This is an 8-year-old company whose only customers are companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. So and it's a $9 billion company. That didn't exist 10 years ago. None of their customers existed 10 years ago. They're only riding the wave of next-gen companies. WeWork changes everything in the real estate space. 8-year-old company, $20 billion valuation. That's $3 billion more than Boston Properties REIT. Boston Properties had a 40-year head start. And interesting aside, so I don't know how many of you guys have used WeWork, but we have a 30-person office in Austin. I got a couple of my guys here from the South, but we have a 30-person office in Austin, and we were going the traditional way. We were negotiating with a landlord, negotiating with a sublessor, had really expensive attorneys going back and forth, marking up documents, took months, cost a lot of money. They wanted all these concessions from us and all these risks and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, the master landlord wouldn't sign unless we gave additional concessions. Thankfully, during that time, WeWork opened a downtown Austin office. We were able to move in, sign a contract, form agreement, like 2-page agreement, month to month, could grow, could shrink, and it was a better location and less expensive. Why wouldn't you do that? Completely changing real estate. So WeWork's a great example. Uber. Most of you guys probably took an Uber from the airport to here today. Uber didn't exist 10 years ago. And their current valuation after a down round is $50 billion. That's $8 billion more than Ford Motor Company. So it's crazy. And shameless plug, all 3 of those companies are Dialpad customers. So when we think about it, bringing it back to communications. So Rich, the tagline of this is riding the wave of communication transformation. Yes, if you think about the wave of communication transformation, it took 75 years for landlines to reach 50 million people. That's a pretty long wave. If you go to the iPhone, it took the iPhone 2.5 years to reach that. And if you go to it today, when the iPhone first came out 2.5 years, today Apple sells that many iPhones every 3 months. And as a little side note, Angry Birds took 35 minutes to reach that many, but still. But if you think about it, the iPhone was a defining event. It was a defining event. Before the iPhone, I think of it as like traditional telecommunications. It was phones, it was wires, it was fixed lines, it wasn't focused on mobility, it wasn't focused around the modern anywhere worker, it was focused around traditional communications, traditional fixed line type stuff. After the iPhone, it became more of a software game. It became apps, became mobility, became how do you be more personally productive. So that was a defining moment. And then if you look at around the same time, the next thing that happened is all the cloud services appeared. So prior to this time, you literally could not move everything to the cloud. Like it wasn't possible. We were lucky at Google Voice. We got acquired by Google. Google actually had their own cloud. They used to call it the Borg. And it was available if you worked at Google. It wasn't a publicly available cloud. It currently, obviously, now is. But those two things changed how you could build a company. So before you had these cloud services, you had to build this monolithic architecture. This is kind of like really kind of like the first way you built a cloud product. Everything was like a lamp stack. You had everything in the same one big node that was really hard to manage. And we'll talk about that in a little second. So if you look at those two things, and not to poke fun at our competitors, but if you came before these events, you were built a different way. You were built for a world that existed a different way. And you were structurally and architecturally built in a manner that just didn't allow you the flexibility that you currently have today. I'm not saying we're better, we're just luckier. We came later, and you get the benefit of a better architecture. So let's think about what is that first generation. So the first generation of your PBX, or the first generation of a phone system, is literally this beast. It's a PBX. It's a bunch of servers sitting on premise in your telephony closet with a team of IT trained professionals to maintain it, running wires out to every single desk phone. And when someone moves, you'd have to change a wire. Big advent of the IP PBX, you then didn't have to move the wires, you could just move the phones. But ultimately, still a big, heavy, expensive investment, super rigid. If you want to do an update, if you want to push new features, you basically get a patch or an upgrade once or twice a year. You'd have to take down the whole phone system. You'd have to like put in the patch and burn it in and test it and do all this stuff. Really legacy. And only only the biggest companies could afford this because it was so expensive and cumbersome and difficult to maintain. So, no kidding, these things actually exist. This was a picture I took at an actual customer visit. Every single one of those wires gets a little card that goes out to a little phone. It's crazy. It's crazy that the vast majority of businesses today still have these types of systems. So this is like, when I get excited about the future of communications, particularly in the enterprise space, I look at every single desk phone, and don't get me wrong, some people still love desk phones, and there's some great desk phone vendors here, and it's always going to be part of the equation. But I look at every single desk phone out there as a potential endpoint that could be moved to the cloud, that could be moved to software, that could be moved to a mobile phone. So then secondly, then you had the second generation. And the second generation was, let's take that thing, this is again before Amazon and the other cloud providers existed, let's take that thing out of the back room of the phone closet and put it in a data center, and then sell it as a subscription to people who can't afford that big thing at their site anyway. So this was like the second gen, right? The first cloud PBX. And it mimicked that feature set, it mimicked the desk phone functionality, and it tried to mimic every single feature on the punch list that Cisco and Avaya had that the IT buyer wanted. And so you ended up with being able to sell to a small business a service and a lot of features that only a large business could afford. So that's kind of like, that was second generation. Now you get to third generation. This is microservices. This is Google Cloud Platform. This is Microsoft Azure. This is Amazon Web Services. And instead of it being this big monolithic piece, and like this is, I'll tell you from personal experience, when we built Grand Central in 2006, it was pre-cloud. It was pre-microservices. And it was a pain. You had to have your border controller, your soft switch, your routing engine, your application logic, your billing, your fraud engine, your reconciliation, all your call history, voicemail, everything in this one node. And then you start to get a little popular. You realize what happens if an earthquake hits the West Coast? Let's put one on the East Coast. And then you realize, okay, now how do I keep them in sync? Which is really, really impossible, very, very difficult. They'd never really perfectly be in sync. And then you'd end up with this very brittle system that if you ever wanted to add features, got really hard to do, and it became very fragile because if you broke one thing in there, you generally knocked out the whole service. And I remember the painful days of Grand Central. Mike Arrington at TechCrunch was an early user, and he used to write about us every time we'd make a mistake, and it happened relatively frequently. And that's just the reality of that architecture. And so the other problem is, as you get more and more successful and you get more and more users, you then need to shard your users and hone them to a single node. So you can have a larger user base, and then you got to sync that all over the place. It just gets to be this really, really difficult mess. So the third generation, and this is where we got some experience at Google before it became public, is we kicked all of the logic into the Google Cloud. And the Google Cloud, just like, and I'm sure Amazon and Microsoft are very similar, but you get this worldwide, instantly available, always redundant, always secure cloud platform. And it's all over the world simultaneously. If we ever push some bad code, we can revert in an instant. Google just lets you go back to another version instantly. You don't have to do anything crazy. And that allows us to effectively, that whole stack that I was talking about, you can remove all the brains and throw all the brains to the cloud. So the cloud is just always there, always thinking. So now all we are left behind is, we call it our split cloud architecture, but we just leave the border controller and the soft switch down in our own racks and tier 1 data centers around the world, and they're just a super efficient media passing engine that is super dumb. And just ask Google, what do I do with this call? What do I do, what do I do, what do I do? And it doesn't need to know anything, it doesn't need to remember anything, it just needs to be efficient and pass those packets to the right server so we can make the call. And that allows you to be able to do things like deploy worldwide instantly, like signing up for a 5,000 person company is like signing up for Gmail. It just is there. It just happens. So it's one of the cool things that the third generation does. The other thing is, like these Lego blocks, if someone or an engineer working on one part of it breaks something, it usually breaks that little block. It doesn't break the whole system. Another great benefit of it. The other thing too is just on the security side, Google has 700 security software engineers, 700 working on Google Cloud. They put $7 billion into their infrastructure last year. Like, that's way more secure than anything any company can do. So it's one of these nice things. And there was a quote from the former CIO of the US government who said, if you're not moving to the cloud, you're crazy. Like, it's the most secure thing you can do, and you'll never be able to be more secure than these guys. So I think it's pretty interesting. It allows for a lot of interesting stuff. So why does it matter? I mean, it matters because it is unknown. It matters because, the future, I'm not sure what it's going to be. Like when I get inspiration from the past, get inspiration from thinking about where things are going, but like some of the things that kind of crack me up, like you look back in the 30s, they're talking about the two-way wristwatch, right? And this is now almost a reality. We don't have video on it yet, but IP will likely bring that really soon. Go to the Jetsons. I remember being a kid checking this out, thinking that would be crazy. Obviously, that happened long ago. Blade Runner, one of my favorite movies, a phone with a person's face on it. Wow, happened with Apple 2010. So with all that being said, it's like what is the future? It's going to be some combination of one to many, many to many. It's going to be voice, video, messaging. It's going to be transcription, going to be AI. Every single thing, in my view, I believe that every single IP endpoint is going to be an endpoint for communications. And so that platform, that architecture is really what's going to be able to enable it. Being able to be built in a structure that allows you to make quick changes, to be able to add things to your platform without having to break things, is really going to be what's going to define it. So, sorry I went fast. I think I made it without throwing up here. I think we got a couple minutes if you want some questions or whatever you want to do, Rich. All right. All right, any questions? Yes. Oh yeah, so think of it as a software cloud-based unified communication. So replace your company's business phone system with software-based, cloud-based PBX. So it'll ring you on your mobile phone, ring you on your laptop, ring you on your tablet, ring you on a desk phone, wherever you want to be controlled, but it's just a full-blown, full-featured business phone system. totally wireless. And yeah, if you want to, it'll ring you however you want to be. If you have a wired phone, we'll ring your wired phone. But if we'll ring your cell phone, we'll ring your tablet. It's all set up through the cloud or set up through the website. So you just say, okay, like when someone presses 1 for sales, here's where it goes to and what it does. Here's how you do time of day decision routing. Here's how you do all sorts of stuff. So think of get rid of your PBX and replace it with that. Yes? Yeah, we're entirely Google Cloud. I think we're one of their larger Google Cloud customers. And the nice thing about Google Cloud is our co-founders came and ran the engineering team from the Google Voice project, so we knew about it really early on. But very similar to Amazon and Microsoft. Yes?
What is your next project?
There's a lot of interesting things coming. There's a lot of interesting things coming. I'd say, we did just launch Dialpad free nationwide. So one of the cool things about having this great low-cost engine and structure is similar to our product Uber conference that has a freemium product. We're able to give small businesses, 5 people or less, free business phone system for life. So you can port in your number or get a new number. People call it. You have a business grade business phone system. So instead of like the landscaper using his cell phone or pool supply guy using his cell phone, now you can have a real business phone system without having to use that. Yeah. We do not monetize the metadata. No, we make our money off the subscription revenue. Yeah. So, and again, like the freemium product is great because you get 5% to convert to paid, you're in great shape. Yes, sir. We have, yes? Oh, what was it, say it again? Yeah, so the question is whether we see Dialpad reselling our infrastructure as kind of a white label service. No. We're all about building the brand. We're all about awareness. We're all about really driving tons of value. And I think once you start being a white label and doing it under someone else, it slows you down. Yes, sir. Currently, we are not, but I'm all ears. All right, anything else?
There is an agent program?
There is an agent program, yeah. I will get you there. I think it's just reseller at dialpad.com. Cool. All right, everyone, thanks so much for your attention. Have a good show. I appreciate it.